There was something unsettling about those two young women. Vanessa and Victoria were identical twins, but unlike what many might imagine, their bond went far beyond just the physical. It was an invisible connection, one that united them on a deep level, one that transcended any logical explanation. Their friendship had always been strong, but this bond, this unspoken understanding, something between sisters, seemed to go further. They knew each other completely. They thought the same way. They felt the same emotions. Even their parents, however, had never fully understood their connection, always believing that something somehow made them closer to each other than any other set of twins. But on a cold autumn morning, something out of the ordinary happened. Vanessa, more introspective and curious, was sitting in the living room of the house she shared with Victoria, watching an advertisement for a famous DNA testing lab on television. The smile on her face, always playful and outgoing, disappeared for a moment. She quickly got up from the couch, grabbed her phone, and texted Victoria. "Hey, have you ever thought about doing that DNA test?" Victoria, on the other hand, always more impulsive, didn't hesitate to reply immediately. "Of course, let's do it. I want to know if there's really something unique about us besides being twins." Vanessa hesitated, feeling a strange knot in her stomach. She didn't know why, but the idea of doing the DNA test had now consumed her thoughts. Something didn't feel right. But she knew that when it came to Victoria, decisions had to be made together. They were a unit. The process of sending the kits was quick. Within days, Vanessa and Victoria had their results in hand. Both were eager to see what the test would reveal. But there was one small detail they hadn't discussed. What would happen if things didn't turn out the way they expected? They would look at each other, laugh and joke, but deep down, both knew that something could be different. Something was about to change in an irreversible way. The email arrived in the morning. Exactly 1 week later, the two twins were on the same couch, in the same room, as always. Vanessa, her eyes fixed on the screen, opened the message. The DNA test revealed a simple result. The results indicate that the two participants are genetically distinct. The words lingered in the air for a moment. It was as though the world around them had slowed down. What did that mean? How could it be possible? How could they be identical twins and yet have different biological fathers? It was impossible. Vanessa looked at Victoria, and that's when the silence settled between them. Both were stunned, unable to process what that result meant. There was an undeniable and devastating truth before them, but neither of them was ready for what would come next. "This can't be." "Right," Victoria murmured, her voice trembling. She hit the refresh button on the email, reviewing the results once again, but nothing changed. "It doesn't make sense. How can we be different?" Vanessa closed her eyes, trying to concentrate. That DNA test was more than just a simple exam. It was the key to unlocking secrets long buried, secrets about their lives, their families, and who they really were. Every fiber of her being wanted to ignore it, but she knew she couldn't. The truth was right there, in front of their eyes. Could it be? Could one of us not be our mom's biological child? Vanessa asked, her voice faltering. Victoria stared at her, her expression now serious. "Are you saying that our mom lied to us?" Vanessa felt a chill down her spine. The feeling was strange. She didn't know what to feel. She was scared that everything she had believed about her family might be a lie, scared that the foundation of her whole life might begin to crumble. "I don't know," Vanessa replied, her voice faltering again. "But now we have to know the truth. We need to find out who we really are." Tension hung in the air. Both were deeply disturbed, and as much as they tried, they couldn't shake the fear that something much bigger was at stake. What else could their mothers have hidden from them? And who were their biological fathers really? What would this mystery reveal about their origins and their lives? That morning the truth had begun to slowly unfold, and Vanessa and Victoria were about to embark on a journey that would change everything they knew about themselves. The air in the house was thick with tension. The once cozy living room now felt like a cold, unfamiliar space as Vanessa and Victoria sat on the couch, processing the news that had shattered their world. The DNA test results were sitting between them, an unspoken truth that neither could ignore. They had always been inseparable, their bond stronger than anything else. But now that bond felt uncertain, fragile. Victoria was the first to break the silence. "I think we need to talk to Mom," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "She has to know about this. We need answers." Vanessa nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was ready for the confrontation. After all, how could they approach their mother with something so explosive? The possibility that one of them wasn't even her biological child was too much to grasp. "Do you think she'll tell us the truth?" Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria didn't hesitate. "She has to. We're her daughters, Vanessa. She owes us the truth." The two sisters stood up and walked toward the kitchen, where their mother, Grace, was preparing lunch. The sound of sizzling pans and the scent of cooked food filled the air, but neither of the girls could focus on it. Their minds were consumed by the revelation that had turned their lives upside down. Grace looked up as they entered. "What's wrong?" "Girls, you both look like you've seen a ghost." Vanessa hesitated, then said, "Mom, we need to talk to you about something. Something important." Grace's face changed instantly. She wiped her hands on a towel and gestured for them to sit. "What's going on? You're scaring me." Victoria didn't wait for Vanessa to speak. She blurted it out, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We did the DNA test, Mom, and it says that we're not the same, that we have different fathers." Grace froze. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't blink, as if she were trying to process what she had just heard. Her face drained of color, and a deep sigh escaped her lips. Vanessa noticed how her mother's hands trembled slightly as she placed the towel down on the counter. "Is that true?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible. Victoria leaned forward, pressing her mother for answers. "We need to know, Mom. How could we not have the same father? All our lives, you told us we were twins. We need the truth." Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I never meant for you to find out this way," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "But you deserve to know." Vanessa and Victoria exchanged a glance, both of them feeling a wave of unease wash over them. There was something about their mother's demeanor that didn't sit right. This wasn't the reaction they had expected. It was as though there was more to the story than they could possibly imagine. "I don't even know where to start," Grace continued, her voice shaky now. "Your father, the man you've always known as your father, isn't really your biological father, both of you. You were conceived under different circumstances." Vanessa's heart raced. "What does that mean, Mom?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Grace stood up, her movements slow as if she were trying to gather the strength to say the words. "It means that when I was pregnant with you, too, I was in a complicated situation. I wasn't married to your father yet. I had a brief relationship with another man, and that man is your biological father, Vanessa." Vanessa's world began to spin. Her mind was racing, trying to comprehend what her mother had just said. "So, you're telling me that I'm not really your daughter?" she asked, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Grace looked at her daughter with sorrow in her eyes. "No, sweetheart, you are my daughter. I raised you. I love you as my own. But you have another biological father, and I've carried that secret all these years, hoping it would never come to light." Victoria, ever the more impulsive one, stood up abruptly, her anger flaring. "Why didn't you tell us? We deserve to know the truth. You've lied to us our whole lives." Grace flinched, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't lie, Victoria. I didn't know how to tell you. You were so young, and I thought it didn't matter. I was afraid of losing you both. I was afraid of what would happen if you knew." Vanessa felt the weight of her mother's words. The truth was like a cold, hard slap to her face, and she wasn't sure how to react. "But why didn't you ever tell us about this other man?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Grace looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumping. "Because the man who is your biological father, he's not part of our lives anymore. He disappeared when I found out I was pregnant with you, Vanessa. I never wanted to drag you girls into that mess. I thought it was better to keep it all in the past." The silence in the room was suffocating. Both Vanessa and Victoria sat there, trying to process the bombshell their mother had just dropped. It was clear that Grace had been carrying this burden for years, and it had finally come to light in the most unexpected way. "We have to find him," Victoria said suddenly, her tone resolute. "We need to find our real father." Vanessa hesitated. "Do we? What if he's not someone we want to meet? What if he's a stranger? What if he doesn't even care about us?" Grace's eyes filled with regret. "You're right, sweetie. I don't know what kind of man he is anymore. But if you want to find him, I'll help. I'll tell you everything I know." The decision had been made. Vanessa and Victoria were going to search for the man who was their biological father. But little did they know this journey would uncover secrets that no one could have ever anticipated. Secrets that would shake their very identities and their understanding of family itself. The days after their conversation with Grace were a blur of emotions, questions, and decisions. Vanessa and Victoria were still reeling from the shock of learning that they had different fathers. They spent long hours talking, trying to piece together their mother's fragmented story, but no answers seemed to make sense. Everything they thought they knew about their lives felt like it had been built on sand, and the foundation was crumbling beneath them. For Victoria, the answer was simple. They needed to find their biological father. She was determined, almost obsessed, with the idea of seeking out the man who shared her blood. To her, it wasn't about just discovering who he was. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from her, a part of herself that had been hidden for so long. Vanessa, on the other hand, was more reluctant. She wasn't sure what to expect from this man, or if meeting him would even change anything. After all, her father had been the man who had raised her, loved her, and been there for every important moment in her life. To her, the man they were searching for was a stranger, and the idea of inviting him into their world was daunting. Still, they knew they had to go forward. The DNA test results had already set the course, and there was no turning back. They had questions, and they deserved answers. It was Grace who gave them the first clue. Her memories of the man, whose name was Isaac Turner, were hazy. They had met in a bar years ago, before she had settled down with their father. Grace had been young, full of dreams, and Isaac had seemed like the kind of man who could sweep anyone off their feet. He was charming, mysterious, and had an air of danger about him. Grace had thought their affair was just a brief fling, nothing more. But when she found out she was pregnant, things took a different turn. Isaac disappeared from her life without a trace. "I don't know where he went after that," Grace had said, her voice full of regret. "I tried to find him, but he vanished. The only thing I remember is that he was from a small town in Pennsylvania. That's all I have." Vanessa and Victoria had no other leads to follow. They didn't even know if Isaac was still alive, but they couldn't let it stop them. They spent the next few days on the phone with private investigators, trying to track down any information they could find on Isaac Turner. The search felt like an endless cycle of dead ends and false leads. Every time they thought they were close to finding something, the trail would go cold. Finally, after weeks of frustrating attempts, they received a call from a private investigator named Henry Foster, who had managed to track down a man named Isaac Turner, living in a small town called Ridgeway, Pennsylvania. The news hit them like a wave. Ridgeway wasn't far from where they lived in Ohio, just a few hours' drive. Without hesitation, they made plans to visit the town and search for the man who might hold the key to their past. The drive to Ridgeway felt surreal. The town was nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, a quiet and peaceful place, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was hard to believe that this small, sleepy town was where the missing pieces of their puzzle lay. As they entered Ridgeway, the first thing that struck them was how ordinary the place seemed. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, and the air smelled of freshly baked bread from a local bakery. It felt like a place where nothing ever changed, where time moved slowly, and where people minded their own business. They checked into a small inn, hoping to get more information the next day. But as the night wore on, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her chest. What if Isaac didn't want to meet them? What if he didn't even know about them? What if the man they were looking for wasn't the person they had imagined? Victoria, however, was resolute. "We came all this way," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "We're going to find him, and we're going to get the answers we deserve." The next morning they set out to find Isaac Turner. They had the address Henry had given them, a small house on the outskirts of Ridgeway. As they approached the house, Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. What would they say to him? How would he react when they told him who they were? The house was older, the paint peeling in places, but it looked well cared for. They rang the doorbell, and after a moment the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, his face weathered by time, his hair graying at the temples. He was older than they had expected, but there was a familiarity to his features that made Vanessa's heart skip a beat. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice rough as though he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tension in the air. "Are you Isaac Turner?" The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Vanessa thought he might slam the door in their faces. But instead he stood there, silent, as though he were processing the question. "Who wants to know?" Isaac asked, cautiously. Victoria didn't hesitate. "We do. We're your daughters. I'm Victoria, and this is Vanessa." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Isaac stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Come in," he said gruffly. "We have a lot to talk about." Vanessa felt a mixture of dread and curiosity as they stepped into the house. This wasn't the moment they had been waiting for, but they couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change everything. Isaac led them through the small house, which had the look of a man who had lived alone for years. The living room was sparsely decorated, with a worn couch and a few old photographs on the walls. The air smelled faintly of tobacco, and there was a thick layer of dust on most surfaces, as though the house had been left undisturbed for a long time. Isaac motioned for them to sit at the table. Vanessa hesitated for a moment, taking in the man who had once been a part of their mother's life. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. She couldn't help but wonder about the years that had passed since Grace had last seen him. What had happened to him? Why had he disappeared? Victoria, always the one to push forward, broke the silence. "We took a DNA test," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It said you're our father." Isaac's expression hardened for a moment, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It was clear that this wasn't a conversation he had been prepared for. But after a moment he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as though trying to shake off the years that had passed since Grace's name had last crossed his mind. "Yeah," he muttered, almost to himself. "I figured that's what this was about." He looked up at them, his eyes now clouded with regret. "I don't know what to say, but I can't just pretend like everything's fine. You should know that I wasn't a part of your lives because I didn't want to be. I had my reasons. A lot of them. Actually," Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had so many questions, and none of them seemed to have easy answers. But Victoria, with her typical determination, leaned in. "What reasons? Why didn't you want to be a part of our lives?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, just seeking clarity, but there was an edge to it, an unspoken demand for truth. Isaac looked away as if trying to find the right words. The room was heavy with his hesitation. "I wasn't ready to be a father," he said finally, his voice low. "I was young, and I didn't have my life figured out. Your mother, she was a whirlwind. I was swept up in it, and I thought things were just a fling. When she got pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't prepared to take on a family, and when I tried to reach out, things got complicated." He paused, his eyes distant. "You have to understand, I was a different person back then. I made choices, bad ones, and I didn't know how to fix them. I just ran." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Vanessa could see the guilt in his eyes. It wasn't enough to excuse the years of absence, but it was something. He hadn't abandoned them without a reason, and yet it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Victoria wasn't ready to let him off the hook, though. "So you just left? You left our mom to raise us on her own? You just disappeared?" Her voice was tight, the anger in her words barely held back. Isaac flinched at her tone, but he didn't argue. "Yes," he admitted quietly. I did, and I regret it. I do, but at the time I thought it was the only way. I didn't think I could offer you anything. Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man sitting in front of them, the father they had sought for so long, was nothing like the hero they had imagined in their minds. He wasn't the savior of their fractured family, the missing piece that would make everything whole again. He was just a man who had made mistakes and paid the price for them by disappearing from their lives. A long silence passed before Victoria spoke again, her voice softer this time. And now? Why are you here now? Why did you agree to meet us? Isaac hesitated, the question seemingly catching him off guard. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe because I didn't want to die with the guilt of never having tried. Maybe because you both deserve answers. I don't know what I'm supposed to say or do. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I thought you deserved to know who I am. Vanessa felt a pang of sympathy for him, but it was overshadowed by a deep sense of betrayal. We don't know you, she said quietly, looking down at the table. You're just a stranger to us. And now we have to figure out what this all means. Isaac nodded, his expression heavy. I get it. I'm not asking you to understand or to accept me, but I hope you'll give me a chance. I may not have been there when you needed me, but I'm here now. I can't change the past, but maybe we can figure out where we go from here. Vanessa glanced at Victoria, who had been quiet for a while, deep in thought. Finally, her sister spoke up, her voice calm but firm. I don't know what I expected, Victoria said, but I think I need some time to process this. I don't know if I can just jump into this like nothing happened, but maybe we can take things slow. Isaac's face softened, and he gave a small nod. I understand. I'll give you both time, no rush. The conversation shifted after that, becoming less about the past and more about the present. Isaac told them a little about his life since he had left Grace and the children. He had gotten married, had kids of his own, and settled into a quiet life in Ridgeway. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden burst of emotion. It felt like they were simply two separate worlds meeting, for the first time two lives that had collided by accident, but without the grand drama they had imagined. As they stood to leave, Victoria turned to Isaac and said, We'll be in touch. But for now, I think we both need to think about all of this. Isaac didn't say anything more. He simply nodded, watching them leave with a look of resignation in his eyes. It was as if he had given up on being a part of their lives, but hoped, in some distant corner of his mind, that maybe things could be different someday. Vanessa and Victoria walked out of the house, their minds racing with questions and feelings they couldn't sort through. The search had ended, but the journey was just beginning. The drive back to the city was long, and the silence in the car was almost unbearable. Vanessa kept her eyes on the road, her fingers gripped tightly around the steering wheel, as if it might steady her thoughts. Victoria sat next to her, her gaze out the window, seemingly lost in her own world. It had been a difficult visit, more than either of them had expected. Isaac's words were still hanging in the air, like smoke his regrets, his admissions and the uncomfortable truth that he had walked away from them. Vanessa couldn't quite reconcile the image of the man they had hoped would be their father with the man they had actually met. Isaac had seemed broken, unsure of himself and full of guilt. But that didn't erase the fact that he had disappeared for decades, leaving their mother to carry the weight of raising 2 children on her own. Do you think we should give him a chance? Victoria's voice broke through the silence, soft and uncertain. Vanessa didn't answer immediately. The question was still too raw, too complicated. She hadn't expected it to be so hard to figure out what to do next. The idea of meeting their biological father had been a fantasy, a hope that something in their past could be fixed. But now that they had faced the reality, it didn't feel as simple. I don't know, Vanessa said after a long pause, her voice tinged with frustration. He's a stranger to us. I don't know how we're supposed to just let him into our lives after everything. I know, Victoria murmured. I feel the same way, but he seems different. He seems like he regrets what he did. Maybe we can try something at least. It doesn't have to be all at once. Vanessa's grip on the steering wheel tightened again. I just don't know if I can. I don't know if I can forgive him for everything, for leaving us, for abandoning Mom. There was a heavy silence again as Vanessa navigated the quiet streets. She had always been the more practical one, the one who believed in facing reality head-on. But now, with everything up in the air, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. How could she just walk away from the life they had built, from the pain their mother had gone through, and let a stranger, no matter how remorseful, become part of their world? You know, Victoria said, her tone thoughtful, maybe it's not about forgiveness. Maybe it's about understanding, about seeing him as who he is now, not who he was then. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. Vanessa nodded slowly, even though she wasn't sure she agreed. I don't know if I'm ready for that. It feels too soon. Victoria turned to her sister, her face full of concern. I'm not asking you to make a decision now, but maybe we shouldn't close the door completely. He's not the man we imagined, but he's still our father. That counts for something, doesn't it? Vanessa was quiet, her thoughts swirling. The question lingered in the car between them, unanswered. She wasn't sure what it counted for, but the ache in her chest made it hard to ignore. They drove in silence for a few more miles, until they reached their apartment building. Vanessa pulled into the parking lot and put the car in park. She turned to look at Victoria, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. She could see the uncertainty there, the hope that maybe they could make sense of everything that had just happened. But Vanessa couldn't bring herself to share that hope just yet. I'm going to need some time to think, Vanessa said softly, her voice weary. This is a lot to process. I'm not ready to decide anything. Victoria gave a small nod, her expression softening. I get it. I just don't want to regret not trying. I don't want to regret never knowing him, you know? Vanessa sighed deeply. I know. But we can't force something that's not there. We have to be careful about opening ourselves up to him. We don't know what kind of person he really is now. I know. But I think we owe it to ourselves to find out. They sat in the car for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation lingering between them. Finally, Vanessa exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Let's take it one step at a time, Vanessa said, meeting her sister's gaze. We'll figure this out, but I'm not making any promises. Not yet? Victoria smiled, a soft, understanding smile. That's all I'm asking for. One step at a time. Vanessa nodded and got out of the car. As they walked toward the building, her mind kept turning over everything that had happened. Isaac, their father, the man they just met. Could they really build something from this? Or was it just a door that should be closed forever? Inside their apartment, Vanessa poured herself a glass of water, trying to clear her head. She needed time to think, to process everything. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that nothing was ever simple when it came to family. People were complicated. Mistakes were made, and sometimes there were no easy answers. She didn't know where this would go, but she knew one thing for sure, whatever happened. She couldn't ignore the past anymore. It was part of who they were, part of their story. And now it seemed it was part of the story they would have to figure out together. The days that followed were heavy with uncertainty. Vanessa found herself lost in thoughts that never seemed to settle. She had never been one to shy away from difficult decisions. But this was different. The presence of Isaac, their biological father, was a disruption to everything she had known. They had lived their lives without him, without that figure, and now his sudden reappearance felt like an earthquake rattling the very foundation of their reality. Victoria, on the other hand, seemed determined to make peace with the idea of Isaac. She had always been the dreamer between them, the one who saw potential in people, even when it seemed improbable. Vanessa couldn't help but admire that about her sister, but it also made the situation more complicated. Victoria wanted to build something out of the wreckage, to create a new narrative for their family. Vanessa wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of optimism. Days passed in a blur, the tension between them palpable. Every time Vanessa tried to talk about it, she found herself unable to articulate her thoughts. What if their mother's pain, her sacrifice, was in vain? What if bringing Isaac back into their lives didn't heal anything, but just tore open old wounds? But Victoria kept pushing. She reached out to Isaac again, this time for a more casual meeting. She suggested they meet at a coffee shop, away from the weight of their apartment. Vanessa hesitated, but after much persuasion, she reluctantly agreed to join. The coffee shop was small, tucked away on a quiet street in the heart of the city. Its windows were lined with plants, and the smell of fresh coffee beans filled the air. Vanessa sat across from Victoria, her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming tea, her mind elsewhere. Isaac was late. He hadn't confirmed the time until the last minute, but when he finally arrived, Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. He looked different. Not just older, though that was clear, but the weight of years that had passed without them was evident in his eyes. There was a distance there, as though he had lived so much without them that he didn't know how to bridge that gap. His smile was hesitant, unsure, and when he sat down, he immediately apologized. "I know this isn't easy," Isaac said, his voice shaky. "I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, too, especially after everything you've been through without me." Victoria was the first to respond, her voice soft but hopeful. "It's not about the past, Isaac. It's about moving forward. We just want to get to know you, to see who you are now, who you've become." Vanessa didn't speak right away. She studied him carefully, his every movement, every word. She was trying to read between the lines, trying to figure out if he was sincere or just another person looking to repair a broken image. Could they really let him back into their lives? Was it fair to give him a chance when they had learned to live without him for so long? "You know, I can't change what I did," Isaac continued, his voice thick with regret. "I was young, scared. I thought I was doing the right thing. leaving you with your mom. But I see now that it wasn't right. It was a coward's choice." Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, at least not outright. But he was asking for understanding, for something she wasn't sure she was ready to give. "You can't just expect everything to be okay because you're sorry," Vanessa finally said. Her voice low, her gaze fixed on him. "You left. We had to grow up without you. We had to watch our mom struggle. We had to become our own family." Isaac looked down at his hands, his fingers curling around his coffee cup. "I know," he whispered, "and I can never take that away. But I want to be here now. I want to know my daughters. I want to be a part of your lives, if you'll let me." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Vanessa's chest ached as she listened to him, trying to separate the man in front of her from the father who had abandoned them. How could she trust him? How could she open the door to a man who had left them to face the world on their own? Victoria's voice broke through the tension. "We don't have to rush into anything. We can start slow, just getting to know you. Maybe that's enough for now." Vanessa looked at her sister, her heart in her throat. Was that enough? Was it enough to let him in, to test the waters, knowing that he could hurt them again? She didn't have the answers. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she also didn't know if she could live with a doubt. The conversation lingered for a while longer, with Isaac offering his apologies and Victoria voicing her hopes. But in the end, the decision wasn't made that day. It wasn't made in the coffee shop, and it wasn't made in the days that followed. Vanessa couldn't make up her mind. She couldn't decide if she wanted Isaac in their lives or if he was just a ghost of the past, better left behind. As they left the coffee shop, Isaac made one last plea, his voice soft but earnest. "I know I can't fix what's broken, but I want to try. Just give me a chance to show you who I am now." Vanessa didn't answer. She just nodded, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. The road ahead wasn't clear. The future was uncertain. But as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder, was she closing a door to something that could heal their family? Or was she just protecting them from further pain? The days after that meeting in the coffee shop felt like they were stretching on forever. Vanessa tried to keep herself distracted, focusing on work and daily routines, but Isaac's words lingered in the back of her mind, like a song she couldn't quite remember but kept playing on a loop. She hadn't expected to feel so conflicted. There was part of her that wanted to let go of the anger, to forgive, but another part of her that couldn't forget the years she had spent alone, without the man who should have been there. Victoria seemed to be taking the situation with more grace. She reached out to Isaac regularly, texting him or calling him, trying to get to know him better, to rebuild the relationship they had never truly had. Vanessa could see how much it meant to her sister, and part of her wanted to be happy for her, to support her in her quest for connection. But the other part of her couldn't shake the unease, the doubt that still clouded her judgment. She started to distance herself more, choosing to spend time alone or with friends, anything to avoid conversations about Isaac. When Victoria would bring him up, Vanessa would nod politely, but offer little else. She couldn't pretend to be excited about it, not when everything felt so fragile and uncertain. One evening, when the sky was painted in shades of purple and pink as the sun set, Vanessa received a call from Victoria. It wasn't unusual for her to call, but there was something different about the tone of her voice this time. "Vanessa," Victoria said, her voice shaky. "Isaac, he's gone." The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the stomach. Gone? What did she mean? Gone? Gone where? What happened? Vanessa's voice cracked as she stood up, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. "I don't know exactly. He was at home, and then he wasn't. I called him a few times today and last night, but he didn't answer. I went to his place this afternoon, and his door was open. His phone was there, but he wasn't." Victoria paused, trying to steady her breath. "I'm scared, Vanessa. I don't know where he is." Vanessa's mind raced. She had no idea what to make of it. Was this his way of backing out? Was he running away again, as he had all those years ago? Or was something else happening? Was he in trouble? "Have you called the police?" Vanessa asked, her voice firm, though she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, I did," Victoria replied, her voice softer now. "They said they'd send someone to check, but they think he might have just left, that he's, he might have just gone somewhere to clear his head." Vanessa took a deep breath. She could hear the fear in Victoria's voice, and it was almost more than she could bear. Isaac had only just come back into their lives, and now he was gone again. This time without a trace. "I'll be there in a bit," Vanessa said, trying to stay calm, but her hands were trembling. "We'll figure this out, okay? We'll find him." She hung up the phone, but her thoughts didn't quiet down. What was happening? Why would Isaac leave so suddenly after all the time he'd spent trying to reconnect with them? There was something off about this, something she couldn't yet understand. Vanessa drove across town, her mind spinning with possibilities. When she arrived at Isaac's apartment, she found Victoria standing outside, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold it all together. She was pale, her eyes red from crying, but she stood tall, determined. "I don't know what's going on," Victoria said as Vanessa stepped out of the car. "He just vanished. There's no sign of him. Nothing. Like he just disappeared into thin air." Vanessa looked around at the apartment building, at the empty parking lot. Isaac's car was still parked in the same spot, but there was no sign of him. She felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something he would do, not after everything. They entered the apartment, and Vanessa felt a wave of unease as soon as she stepped inside. It was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt thick, like something was wrong, but no one knew exactly what. The apartment was tidy, nothing out of place except for the phone sitting on the kitchen counter. "Did the police check everything?" Vanessa asked, her voice low as she moved through the space, trying to make sense of it all. Victoria nodded. "They said he could have just left, that maybe he's staying with someone, but I don't know. I just have this feeling that something's not right." Vanessa knelt down by the couch, her fingers brushing over the cushion. There was a faint smell of Isaac's cologne, but that didn't mean much. The place felt eerily still, like it hadn't been touched for hours, maybe longer. She stood up again, walking to the bedroom. It was there, in the bedroom, that she saw it, a small notebook lying open on the nightstand. Curiosity gripped her, and before she could stop herself, she picked it up. It was Isaac's handwriting, but the words inside made her stomach twist. The entries were brief, mostly fragmented thoughts, but they were clear enough to see a pattern. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to make this right. I thought I could be a better father, but I've failed them again. I don't deserve to be here, and they don't deserve me. I'm leaving, for good this time. I hope they can forgive me." Vanessa's heart sank as she read the final line. Isaac had written a goodbye. He wasn't coming back. The notebook slipped from Vanessa's hands and fell to the floor with a soft thud. She couldn't believe what she had just read. Isaac had known all along that he wasn't ready to face the consequences of his actions. He'd been struggling with the idea of being their father, but instead of confronting it, he had chosen to disappear once again, leaving a trail of questions that Vanessa didn't know how to answer. Victoria, standing at the doorway, saw the look on Vanessa's face and rushed over. "What is it? What did he leave? Is there anything?" Vanessa picked up the notebook from the floor, feeling as though the weight of Isaac's words was crushing her. She handed it to Victoria, who scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing as she reached the final line. "No," Victoria whispered. "No, he can't just leave like this." The room was silent for a long time. Vanessa watched her sister, who had so desperately wanted to make things work with Isaac. She could see the pain in her eyes, the realization sinking in that Isaac had never been fully honest with either of them. He had tried to play the part of the father, of the man who wanted to make up for lost time, but in reality he had never been willing to stay. "I don't get it," Victoria said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't he tell us? Why didn't he talk to me first, instead of running away?" Vanessa sat down on the couch, her hands shaking as she held her head in her hands. She had so many questions, so many doubts swirling in her mind, but there was no answer. Isaac had left them both, and now there was nothing to do but pick up the pieces. "We don't know why he left," Vanessa said, her voice quiet. "But I think there's more to it than just him being unable to face us." Victoria sat down beside her sister, her eyes scanning the notebook again, as though hoping to find some hidden message or clue. "I don't understand. I mean, he could have told us what was going on. He didn't have to disappear like this." Vanessa took a deep breath. "Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he didn't think he could ever be the father we needed." Victoria's voice faltered. "But we gave him a chance. We wanted him to be a part of our lives. We wanted to forgive him." "I know, but sometimes people can't accept forgiveness, not when they feel they don't deserve it," Vanessa said softly. "Maybe that's why he left." Victoria sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of those words settle in. Finally, she stood up, her eyes determined. "We can't just let him go like this. We have to find him. He needs to know that we're here for him. He can't keep running." Vanessa felt a pang of guilt. Part of her wanted to let it go, to move on and let Isaac deal with his demons alone. But Victoria was right. They couldn't just let him slip through their fingers again. He had been a part of their lives, no matter how flawed his attempts had been, and they owed it to themselves to at least try to find him. "All right," Vanessa said, standing up with her sister. "We'll find him, but we need to do this carefully. We don't know where he is, and we don't know what's going through his mind right now." Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't care how long it takes. I'll keep looking. I need to know what happened to him." The next few days were filled with endless calls and dead ends. The police had no new leads. His friends hadn't seen him. His colleagues at work hadn't heard from him in days. Isaac had completely vanished from his life. leaving only the faintest traces behind. But with each passing hour, Vanessa and Victoria grew more determined. They couldn't let him slip away again. Not without answers. Vanessa took a leave from work, focusing all of her energy on the search. They visited places Isaac used to frequent, places that were familiar to him. Each time they knocked on doors, spoke to strangers, they were met with more uncertainty. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. As the days turned into a week, a feeling of helplessness began to settle in, like the walls were closing in. No matter what they did, it felt like they were always one step behind, as though Isaac had anticipated their every move. Then, one evening, as Vanessa and Victoria sat in a small cafe, drinking coffee and trying to keep their spirits up, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Vanessa picked up the phone quickly, her heart racing. "Hello, Vanessa?" A deep voice asked on the other end. "It's Isaac." Her breath caught in her throat, and her pulse quickened. "Isaac, where are you?" "We've been looking for you everywhere." There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment Vanessa thought he was going to hang up. But then he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I didn't mean to hurt you. I couldn't stay. I thought I could make things right. But I realized I'm not the person you need. I'm not the father you deserve." Vanessa's heart ached. "Isaac, please, just come home. We don't want you to be perfect. We just want you." Isaac's voice broke. "I don't know if I can come back. I don't know if I can live up to what you both expect from me." "Isaac," Victoria's voice came through on the other end of the line, cutting through the silence. "We don't expect perfection. We just want you to be here." Another long pause. Then Isaac spoke again, quieter this time. "I'll try, but I need time. I'm not ready yet." The call ended abruptly, leaving Vanessa and Victoria staring at the phone, unsure of what to make of it. Isaac hadn't given them a clear answer, but he had acknowledged their feelings. Maybe there was hope yet. Vanessa felt the weight of the phone call linger, as if Isaac's words had planted a seed that was slowly growing inside her. He wasn't ready to return, but he was acknowledging their attempts to reconnect. That was progress, wasn't it? Or was it just another fleeting moment of hope that would eventually fade into disappointment, like so many times before? Victoria, who had been quietly watching her sister, seemed lost in thought. "He's coming back, isn't he?" "He said he would try." Vanessa shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know, Vicky. It's hard to believe him after everything. He keeps running. How many times are we supposed to just wait for him to come back, only for him to disappear again?" "Maybe this time is different," Victoria replied, trying to convince herself more than anything. "Maybe he just needed to hear us say that we wanted him. Maybe he was waiting for that." Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. "Maybe, but it feels like we've been here before, and I don't know if I can go through that again." The silence between the two sisters was thick, filled with the unsaid words of disappointment, frustration, and fear. They didn't know if Isaac could truly change, or if they were just clinging to a dream. The past had taught them that the possibility of him returning only led to more heartbreak. But something about this time felt different. They both wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Isaac would come back and stay. Over the next few days, the search for Isaac slowed down. They no longer knocked on doors or visited places he used to frequent. It felt like they had exhausted every possibility. The only lead left was that phone call, a vague promise of a future reconciliation that seemed increasingly distant. But something had shifted in Victoria. She could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest, like a secret she couldn't ignore any longer. There was something about Isaac's sudden disappearance that didn't sit right. It wasn't just the fact that he had run off again, it was the way he had distanced himself without explanation. The way he had left, with barely a trace. "I think there's something we're missing," Victoria said, breaking the silence one evening as they sat in their living room. Vanessa looked up from the old family album she had been leafing through, a quiet frown on her face. "What do you mean?" "I think there's more to Isaac's story than he's told us," Victoria continued, her voice steady but serious. "I've been thinking about it, and it doesn't make sense. Why would he leave so suddenly without saying goodbye? Why the secrecy? Why wouldn't he want to be a part of our lives after all this time?" Vanessa felt a shiver run down her spine. It was a thought she hadn't allowed herself to entertain. Not yet, but now that Victoria had said it out loud, the pieces seemed to fall into place. There was something more, a hidden truth that Isaac had been trying to bury. "What are you thinking?" Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria stood up, pacing around the room as she spoke. "I don't think Isaac left because he couldn't face us. I think he left because he was hiding something. Something big." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What could be bigger than his failure to be a father?" "I don't know, but I have to find out," Victoria said, her eyes locking with Vanessa's. "I don't care what it is, but we need to know. We deserve to know what's been going on with him all this time." Vanessa felt a sudden wave of anxiety wash over her. The thought of digging deeper into Isaac's past, and to whatever secret he was hiding, made her uneasy. But Victoria was right. They deserved answers. They couldn't keep running in circles, hoping for a miracle. "All right," Vanessa said, standing up. "Let's find out what he's been hiding. We need to talk to his friends, his colleagues, anyone who might know something we don't." And so they set out again, but this time with a different approach. It wasn't just about finding Isaac, it was about uncovering the truth behind his disappearance. They contacted people from his past, those he had worked with, and even some of his old friends. They pushed harder than they had before, asking the uncomfortable questions and digging deeper into the past they had tried so hard to leave behind. It was through one of these conversations that the first crack in the facade appeared. A former colleague of Isaac's, someone who had worked closely with him during the last few years, mentioned something that Vanessa and Victoria hadn't expected. "You know, Isaac was acting strange toward the end, like he was keeping something from everyone, even me. But the weirdest part? I found out he was seeing someone else. Someone, not his wife." Vanessa froze, her heart racing. "Someone else? What do you mean?" The colleague hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "I don't know the details, but he was meeting with her regularly. She was someone from his past. I don't know what happened between them. But it was clear Isaac wasn't as invested in his family as he should have been." The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. Isaac had been seeing someone else? How long had this been going on? Was that why he had kept disappearing? Had he been lying to them all along? Victoria's face hardened, her eyes burning with the need to understand the truth. "Do you know who she is? Where she lives?" The colleague shook his head. "I don't know. but I think Isaac left town to be with her. He was planning on starting fresh, starting over. Vanessa could feel the betrayal creeping into her veins. All this time, Isaac had been lying, keeping secrets from them, and now it seemed like he was gone for good. The truth had come crashing down on Vanessa and Victoria like a wave, drowning them in a sea of confusion and pain. Isaac had been hiding something all along another life, another woman. As the revelation sank in, Vanessa felt as though the ground beneath her was slipping away. Her world had been built on the belief that no matter what, Isaac would return to them. But now she was faced with a devastating reality. Isaac had never truly intended to come back. Victoria's mind raced with the new information. What kind of man does that? She whispered, almost to herself. She couldn't reconcile the father she had known, the man who once promised to be there for them, with the stranger Isaac had become. He had abandoned his family, not just physically, but emotionally, for another woman. Vanessa was still processing what they had uncovered, but her gut twisted with an unsettling feeling. She had trusted Isaac with everything, her love, her hope, her belief that he would somehow come back and make everything right. Now that trust had been shattered, replaced by the cold reality of his betrayal. Her heart was heavy with anger and sorrow. But she knew one thing: they had to find him. They needed answers. They deserved to know why he had done this to them. Victoria was already on the phone, making arrangements to meet with the people who might have known more about Isaac's whereabouts. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was no different. She was determined to confront Isaac, to demand an explanation for the years of lies and heartbreak he had caused. "I'm going to find him," Victoria said, her voice firm with resolve. "We're going to end this, Vanessa. I need closure. We both do." Vanessa nodded slowly. Her heart was in turmoil, torn between the desire for closure and the fear of facing Isaac again. She wasn't sure she was ready to confront him, to hear whatever excuses he might offer. But she couldn't allow herself to back down. Not now, not when they were so close to the truth. The following days were filled with frantic searches and phone calls. Vanessa and Victoria pushed forward with relentless determination, contacting people from Isaac's past, trying to piece together the puzzle of his life. They followed leads, sometimes fruitless, sometimes frustrating, but they couldn't stop now. Isaac had done this to them, and they would not let him escape without facing the consequences. Eventually, a breakthrough came. They discovered that Isaac had moved to a small town in upstate New York, far from the life he had once known. The information was like a jolt of electricity, igniting something inside Vanessa. She felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the end of this long journey was finally in sight. She would finally have the confrontation she had been dreading and longing for. Victoria didn't waste a second. She immediately made plans to travel to the town and confront Isaac, demanding answers. Vanessa hesitated, torn between fear and anger. But she couldn't let her sister go alone. Together, they would face Isaac, and together they would find out the truth behind his betrayal. The drive to upstate New York felt like an eternity. The cold, gray landscape outside the car window matched the storm brewing inside Vanessa's chest. She thought back to all the memories she had shared with Isaac, the love, the promises, the family they had built. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Now all that remained were questions and the gnawing feeling of betrayal. When they finally arrived in the small town, it felt eerily quiet, as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They drove through the streets, looking for signs of Isaac's new life. The town seemed ordinary enough: small houses, a few shops, and streets lined with trees. Nothing about it suggested that this was the place where Isaac had decided to start over, to leave everything behind. Victoria led the way, her eyes scanning the houses and buildings as they passed. She was determined, focused, and resolute. She knew that Isaac was somewhere in this town, hiding behind the walls of a new life. Vanessa followed, her heart pounding in her chest. It was in the most unlikely of places, a small cafe on the corner of Main Street, that they finally found him. Isaac was sitting at a table near the window, his back to them, a cup of coffee in front of him. For a moment Vanessa froze. She hadn't seen him in so long, and the sight of him, so familiar yet so distant, made her feel as if the years had collapsed into a single moment. Victoria didn't hesitate. She marched straight toward the table, her footsteps sharp against the wooden floor. Vanessa followed, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Isaac looked up as they approached, his face flickering with a mix of surprise and guilt. But there was something else there, too, something cold, almost as if he had been expecting this moment. "Isaac," Victoria said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "We need to talk." Vanessa stood beside her sister, her eyes fixed on Isaac. The man who had once been the center of their world was now a stranger. The man who had promised to love them, to be there for them, had chosen to walk away without a second thought. Isaac's eyes darted from Victoria to Vanessa, and for a moment there was silence. He didn't speak, didn't offer any apology or explanation. His silence was deafening, more hurtful than anything he could have said. Finally Isaac spoke, his voice low and tired. "What do you want from me?" Victoria's eyes burned with intensity. "I want the truth. Why did you leave? Why did you abandon us?" Isaac sighed, as if the weight of the question had drained him of any remaining energy. He looked away for a moment, his gaze distant. "I didn't want to leave you. I didn't want to hurt you. But I couldn't keep living the lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. There was someone else, and You think that makes it better?" Victoria interrupted, her voice rising with anger. "You think that abandoning us for another woman makes sense? You left us, Isaac. You left your daughters, your family. How do you explain that?" Isaac's expression faltered, but he didn't offer an explanation. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes searching theirs as if weighing the consequences of his actions. For the first time, Vanessa saw him as he truly was, a man who had failed them, who had taken the easy way out, who had chosen to escape rather than face the pain he had caused. "I'm sorry," Isaac said, quietly, "but I can't change what I've done." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with regret and resignation. The room felt suffocating. The tension between Isaac, Vanessa, and Victoria was palpable, like an invisible force pressing down on all of them. The last few moments had been filled with awkward silences, strained words, and unspoken anger. Isaac's apology, though sincere, had done little to alleviate the pain. He had failed them, not just as a father, but as a man who had once promised to stand by them no matter what. Vanessa felt the anger rise within her once more. She hadn't known what to expect when they finally confronted Isaac. But she certainly hadn't expected this, a man who seemed to have no real remorse, who couldn't truly explain himself, who was more resigned to the choices he had made than willing to fight for what he had lost. But as much as Vanessa wanted to scream, to demand more from him, she found herself frozen. There was a part of her that still wanted to believe in the man she had once loved, the man who had held their family together. She wanted to believe that somewhere deep inside, Isaac cared enough to make things right. But that part of her was quickly dying, smothered by the bitter truth that Isaac had chosen to walk away from his responsibilities. Victoria, on the other hand, was less inclined to indulge in any further emotional dialogue. She had always been more pragmatic, more determined to face the cold reality of things. You don't get to apologize, Isaac. You don't get to say sorry and think that erases everything. You left us. You didn't just leave your family, you left your daughters. You abandoned us. You made a choice, and it wasn't us. Isaac looked at her, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that might have been guilt or regret, but it was quickly gone, replaced by the hardened man Vanessa had come to know over the years, the man who had failed them. "I know what I did," Isaac muttered, voice hollow, "and I'm sorry, but that's all I can say now. I've moved on. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect anything from you." Vanessa felt the sting of his words. He had moved on. He had rebuilt his life while they had stayed behind, mired in the wreckage he left in his wake. The years had not been kind to her or to Victoria. They had spent so long clinging to the hope that Isaac would come back, that he would return and make everything right. But he hadn't, and now that hope felt like a distant memory. For the first time in years, Vanessa realized just how much she had been holding on to a version of Isaac that no longer existed. The man before her wasn't the father she remembered. He wasn't the man who had once held her hand and promised to take care of them forever. He was a stranger, a man who had chosen to let them go. Victoria stepped closer to the table, her voice steady but full of steel. "You know, I thought you were better than this. But I guess I was wrong. You made your choice and we made ours. We'll get by without you. You don't need to worry about us anymore." Isaac's gaze faltered slightly, and for the briefest moment Vanessa saw a flicker of emotion cross his face. But it was quickly replaced by the same indifference he had been showing ever since they had walked into that cafe. Vanessa could feel the walls around him thick, unyielding walls he had built to protect himself from the mess he had created. And that realization, that cold, hard realization, made her blood run cold. She looked at Isaac one last time, and in that moment she realized that there was nothing left to say. He had made his decision, and so had they. "I think we're done here," Vanessa said, her voice firm but quiet. She turned to Victoria, who nodded without hesitation. They walked out of the cafe, their footsteps echoing in the quiet town. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt the weight of her emotions begin to lift. The bitterness, the anger, the sorrow, they were still there, but now they were tempered with something else. A sense of finality, a sense that they could move on from Isaac, that they could begin to rebuild their lives without him. As they made their way back to the car, Victoria glanced over at Vanessa, her expression unreadable. There was no joy in the confrontation, no sense of victory. It had all felt so anticlimactic, so hollow, but there was something else there, too, a quiet resolve. Isaac's betrayal, his abandonment, had not broken them. It had forged them into something stronger. Vanessa looked out the window as they drove through the small town, her thoughts swirling. She was free now, free of the ghost of the man she had once loved, free of the weight of the past. But as much as she longed for closure, she knew that the true work was just beginning. They had to rebuild, piece by piece, what Isaac had torn apart. The drive back to Vanessa's apartment was long, silent. The car hummed with the sound of the engine, the world outside slipping by, unnoticed, as both women sat in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they turned onto the familiar street that Vanessa broke the silence. "You know, I always thought we'd have more time to fix things with him. I thought one day he'd come back and it would be like it used to be," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. Victoria kept her eyes on the road, her hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel. Maybe that was just wishful thinking. People don't just come back, Vanessa. Not like that. Not when they've made their choices. Vanessa stared out the window, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The man she had once adored, the father who had promised to always be there for them, was gone, and no amount of hoping, of longing for what had been, would change that. The truth was undeniable, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to fight it. Victoria pulled into the parking lot of the small apartment complex where Vanessa had lived for the past few years. The place was modest, nothing fancy, but it had been home. Vanessa had never minded the simplicity of it. What mattered was that it was theirs, hers, and Victoria's. The constant through the years, when everything else had shifted around them. Vanessa stepped out of the car, her legs a little shaky from the weight of the day's revelations. She didn't want to face the empty apartment just yet, didn't want to be alone with the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind since the meeting with Isaac. She needed something to fill the silence, something to ground her. "Let's grab a drink," Vanessa suggested, the words spilling out before she could even think about them. "Maybe at the bar down the street?" Victoria looked at her for a long moment, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You sure you want to do that?" "After everything?" Vanessa nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I don't want to think about it anymore. I just want to let go of today." They didn't talk much as they walked to the nearby bar, the familiar neon sign glowing softly in the dusklight. The warm, dimly lit interior felt like a small refuge from the weight of everything that had happened. They slid into a booth in the corner, a place they had been to countless times over the years. The bartender, a man with a friendly smile, who had seen them both through so many quiet nights, nodded when he saw them. "What'll it be, ladies?" Vanessa hesitated for a moment, then ordered a whiskey. She needed something strong to erase the nagging tension in her chest, something to make it all feel distant. Victoria, on the other hand, ordered a beer, her eyes scanning the room, her expression distant. The drinks came, and for the first time in hours, Vanessa felt the warmth spread through her, melting away some of the coldness that had settled in her bones. She took a deep sip, savoring the burn. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him, Vic," Vanessa said, staring down at the amber liquid in her glass. "But I'm done waiting for him to change. I can't keep holding on to that hope. It's just not real." Victoria didn't respond immediately. She took a slow sip of her beer and leaned back in the booth, her eyes softening. "I think you've been forgiving him all along. You just didn't know it." Vanessa furrowed her brow, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Victoria said, her tone measured but kind, You've been holding out for the version of him that you wanted, the version that would come back and make everything right. But you've been forgiving him in every way that matters by not letting him destroy you. You've built a life without him. You've kept going. That's forgiveness, even if you don't see it that way. Vanessa was silent for a long moment, letting the words sink in. She hadn't looked at it that way before, hadn't realized how much strength it had taken to move forward without Isaac, without the father she had wanted him to be. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about letting Isaac back in. It was about freeing herself from the anger, the resentment that had held her captive for so long. The rest of the night passed in a haze of drinks, quiet conversation, and the kind of peace that only came when the truth was laid bare. Vanessa and Victoria didn't talk much about Isaac. They didn't need to. What mattered now was what came next. They didn't need him to define their future. As they walked back to the apartment, the cool night air felt cleansing. The city was quiet, the hum of the world just a faint background noise. Vanessa didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready to face it. Without Isaac, without the past. They reached the door to Vanessa's apartment, and for the first time she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The pieces of her life had fallen into place, even if it wasn't the way she had once imagined. It was enough. The door clicked open, and Vanessa stepped inside, the familiar scent of her apartment wrapping around her like an old, comforting blanket. She glanced over at Victoria, who was already heading to the couch, her posture relaxed. There was no need for more words. They had already said everything that needed to be said. Vanessa took a deep breath and sat down beside her. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years she felt like she was starting to understand the questions. And that was enough.